Hello, this is a quick demonstration of what will become PaleoRose someday, but it's actually, at the moment, just still referred to as XRose, but the name will change. I haven't updated this app in a while, mainly because I haven't seen a lot of interest in it, so I haven't been working on it very actively. However, I'm getting more and more interested in releasing this app in concert with some software for the iPhone, iPads, and so on, because it makes sense to have a nice little combination. So what I'm going to show you really quickly is the state of the app and how it works, so you can get an idea of what it is and what it does. Just to show you around, in the front center, or the main screen, we see our rose diagram. It's pretty bland and not much detail there, but that's okay. We're going to add to it. On the left, we have a layers panel, and on the bottom, we have a tables little panel, and we have a series of icons up top. So let's start with the grid itself. There's two parts to it. There's the geometry of the actual plot, and then there's the grid we put on top of that geometry. So let's look at the geometry really quickly. So we go to the geometry inspector, which is this ruler icon, and we see a few options. As you notice, first we have a grid system and we have a sector system. The grid system determines how the grid is actually laid out. And we can change the size relative to the block here. If we want to make it bigger, we want to make it smaller. I usually leave it smaller because if you make it too big, it'll go outside its drawing area. It's kind of a pointless, it's really a pointless value. I'll eliminate that in the future. But we also have two different grid types. We have an equal area and linear style grid. The equal area is what I'm showing now. Notice that this particular wedge is very tall in comparison to this particular wedge. However, the area in each of these wedges is the same. This is done to offset the illusion that minor differences in counts can create just because it's stretched out. Now right now this is equal area, but if we switch it to linear, we'll see what it is. Now the difference between these lines are the same. But the areas in this wedge are much bigger than the area in that wedge. So if you have one value here and two values here, you have a strong perceptual difference between those two cases. So in general, for most plotting, you want it as an equal area. Not all, but most. You can have the units be counts or percentages. I usually leave it as percentages, but you can switch it to counts if you prefer. And in this case, the maximum value in percent is 30%. You can also have it auto-calculate that. At the bottom here, we have what I call a hollow core size. I plan on modifying this a bit. There's two ways you can have an issue with the diagram. If you look closely right in here at the very core of this symbol, we get a really terrible looking artifact. We have all lines going together, and we have a lot of graphic artifacts going there that's just not very pleasant to the eye. There's two ways to really handle that. Right now I'm only doing one, I believe. And the one is that I'm not doing is simply stop drawing the lines at a distance from the center and maybe just have the cardinal directions drawn. The other way is to have a hollow core where you just simply start the 0 point farther out so you can see the actual lines. In some ways I like this a lot better. If you notice, the equal area also adjusts for that. So it keeps those triangles about the same area. So it gets rid of that pattern, and it is still pleasing to look at. So I'll just set that to 0 for now. The second part is the sector system. Now this is the bins the angles are broken down in. Right now they're broken down into 10-degree bins, which means there's going to be 36 different sectors on this circle. Now, what you can do with that, you can change the size of the bin. You can make it larger, or you can make it smaller. So you're just simply changing the size. Now, one thing that's going on here is that you see more lines coming in or going out depending on which direction I'm going, but that's actually being controlled by the default grid. It's just following each sector. So each of these sectors is drawn. So when I change the number of sectors, it changes the number drawn here. And notice that these two numbers are interrelated. You can't separate one from the other. Now, let me switch this back to 10 for a 10-degree angle. One thing you can do with this app, I usually do to teach students how problematic rose diagrams can sometimes be, is you can change the start angle. Right now it's set at 0 degrees, but I can offset that a bit. So make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. So now the starting bend starts right about there instead of there. Now in this case, the lines aren't following that starting bend position. But what this does is gives us a way to change how it's being grouped, all your values are being grouped together. It's really great to demonstrate how influenced by minor changes of angle can be with a rose diagram. So most of the time, you're just going to have that set to 0. So that's the geometry plot. Now let's look at the grid itself. So let's inspect it. There's a lot of things we can change here. We can change the line weight if we want. Make it very thin or very thick. We can return that back down to 1. We can change the color if we choose to. We can change it to reds. We can use any of these color tools we want. We can make it semi-transparent, make it blue, anything you want to do. Most of the time you won't want to do that, but there are reasons why you might want to change the color. We can change the radials, in other words, the lines from the center to the edge. We can make them visible. We can turn them off if we only want to see the circles. And we can lock it to the sector count. Remember when I was showing you the change of geometry, when we changed the number of sectors it had, it locked it. But it does not lock to the offset. Now, you can also turn off the locking to the sector count and have your own grid here. Most of the time you're going to keep those together. You may, for example, if you want more sectors, you may want to have less lines. So if you have a 5-degree angle sector, you may want a 10-degree angle or even 15-degree angle set of lines. So if you wanted a 30-degree set of radials, for example, it may look like this. Gives you a little bit of flexibility. Now we can also add ticks and labels. This system isn't perfect, but it works. So we can turn on ticks. Now the ticks are these lines on the outside. So now you see a long tick line. I click them off and they go away. Now, I'm not sure why there isn't one forming at the top. It could be something to do with how I drew it before. But we can also show minor ticks. So now we have a set of minor ticks as well. If we want labels, we can also turn those on so we can see the numbers. Now notice we have several different numbering schemes we can do. We can do the quadrant where it goes from north to east, 10 to 90, and then north to west, 10 to 90. Same thing from south, either way, the quadrant system. We can also do the 0 to 360 system if you wish. We also have the alignment of the numbers themselves. They can either be horizontally aligned, or we can rotate them to be at the angle. I like them horizontal, but it can go either way. And our major points here can either be east, north, south, east, west, or we can change them to the actual numbers. There. I'll leave it at letters and I'll turn off, leave that there. And I can turn off all the numbers except the major points and just do that. I can leave the ticks on or whatever. So let's go to circles. We can have the visible circles, or we can turn them off, which is not necessarily the most pleasant thing in this particular count. We can have a ring count that's automatic, or we can fix it to whatever we want. I'll turn that back off. You can also change the value increments, depending if you want to do something different. You can also add labels. So notice now we have labels for each of the increments, and we can actually position them whenever we want, preferably out of the way of our data. So that's, in a quick hurry, is what the main grid layer does. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. How do I want to add data? Well, I have some data over here that's from a variety of sources, including one of the classic statistics books, or geostatistics book by Davis. This is his data that he made available with his book. So we want to add these data. All we have to do is go to tables, and I want to add this data set, and you can see that it's just numbers in azimuth directions. So I'm going to give it the same name. It's going to be tab limited, and it's going to be standard ASCII, and it gives you a few options. The options have changed quite a bit since I originally wrote the software, so I'm going to have to update this. And I'm going to turn this off because it has no column titles in the file. So now I have down here a table for Carolina. Now you might be saying, why don't I just go ahead and plot these data as Carolina? And the reason is this app actually supports multiple columns of data. So in not only the azimuth, you could have things like latitude, longitude, what kind of data it is. Is it ripple marks? Is it water flow direction? Is it some other directional information in there? And as a consequence, you can actually search your Carolina data there for whatever characteristics you want and just plot those values. So let's add a data layer. We're going to get it from Carolina. Now, we want to base it on the values for the data in column 1, and we'll call that Carolina. Now, if you had more complicated data, you could add a set of modifiers here. There's basically SQL for your example. You can pull this stuff out using SQL, and then you can plot a subset of your data instead of a full, complete rendering of it. So let's create a data layer. So now we have those original data. So as you can see, it's black. We can turn the grid off if we just want to see the data plot itself. Turn the grid back on. Let's take a look at what we can do with this. We have appearance and statistics. Appearance gives us a number of options. We can use a standard petal style rose diagram here. We could use a histogram where you have just bars instead of wedges. And this is one of those cases where you would probably not want an equal area type plot. You want a linear plot, because now, since it's a solid line, it's going to be distorted by the fact that it's equal area. Now, while I'm at this, you can barely see these lines, but if I add the weight to it, it becomes clear where they are. Now we also have a dot diagram. Again, this is when you might want to consider doing a linear rather than equal area. But with this one, we can also change the circle size, make it bigger or smaller, depending on your preference. Now, again, we can also change the color and the fill lines, so you can do a little bit there. Dot deviation, which is a little bit more complicated type of plot, and a kite style plot. Now, just getting back to the standard petal diagram, one of the things we can do is we can say, oh, I want it to be bidirectional. Just turn that on, and now it's bidirectional. And just to show you that you can change the colors, I'll just make that a dark gold color. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll try to make that the same color over there, and there you go. Now, one reason why you might want to do this is if you export these diagrams, they come out as a PDF. If you do different layers in different colors and bring them into something like Adobe Illustrator, you can actually then separate out each separate layer and color them again and have all these different layers in Illustrator. But for this app, we don't really need to do that. And there we go. And if we want the statistics, it gives us all the basic statistics for this data set. And you can copy and paste this out. Now, what if I want to have a vector, a line describing the statistics of this particular data plot? There's a button here called Add Vector Layer. You must have selected a data set over here for it to work. So select it, Add Data Layer. You have Carolina. Actually, I take that back. You may not need to select it because you have an option, but it'll only come on if you have a data layer on there. So let's create a layer for Carolina. So it adds the word stat in front to the Carolina. Now, what you may notice, I'm going to bring this up to the top, is you can see a very small arrow and an error bar. So let's turn everything off but that. Whoops. So this is what it's actually drawing. It's an arrow from the center with an error bar. Now, if we put the grid on it, you can see a little bit better. And we can go back and change our settings. Now, we can have it turn on and off the line, and we can turn on and off the error. But we can also change how the line itself draws. So right now it's a full vector from 0 to the outer line. You can do vector strength to give you an idea how strong that vector is. If it's a weak vector, it'll be short. If it's a good solid line, strong vector, it'll be very long. Or you can just do a simple vector on the outer ring. So it looks like that. And as usual, you can change the line weight. You can change the size of the arrow to suit your needs, and even the color. So you can change that. Now, one thing about it, it changes all of that to red. I'll just leave it there for now. And that is the vector. So we can plot our Carolina back on there. We can see our vector, see what the average is. And there we are. It's a very simple process. But in theory, we could have multiple types of file formats, SQL searching, which I'm not going to demonstrate because I'm not entirely sure that it still works. But you can also do a few reports here. You can have an F2 test there. If you want to calculate that, treat them as bidirectional. You get the dataset statistics if you want to save them out. Oh, I do have a core layer. So now I have a core. If you remember, it's kind of an overlay right now. So you can inspect the core. You can make it bigger or smaller if it just annoys the living daylights out of you. But this one covers it up. So it doesn't change the core, the position of the lines. It just covers it up to get rid of that pattern a little bit. I'm not a big fan of it. Okay. See if there's anything else here I should probably show you, but that's probably enough to show right now. Hopefully that will give you some interest in what this is. And by the way, you can have multiple tables in here and spend a lot of time investigating different tables and be able to plot different plots. So if you're interested in trying what will become a PaleoRose someday, just contact me at tmore@paleoterra.com. Check the website for that, and enjoy.